The following KQED production was produced in high definition.
What Darwin really provided all of us as biologists was the idea that things were related to each other. Not just immediately closely related, but in the broadest sense. These things have developed together from common ancestors, and that's the basic idea of evolution. I think Darwin started out with beetles, as I did. I just never outgrew that phase.
As one of the world's foremost beetle experts, David Kavanaugh has spent 40 years discovering and describing new species.
It's important to describe new species because we don't know all the players. We don't know how they interact with one another, which ones are vital to the functioning of communities and ecosystems. The diversity of them is just so spectacular. Some of them have beautiful colors, bizarre shapes. Some of them are huge. My interest is in beetles that live at high elevations and high latitudes, in cold places, because those are the places I like to be.
Kavanaugh focused his research on a genus of alpine beetles called Nebria.
They're graceful, beautiful, fast. You don't really get to see them very often unless you go out at night with a headlamp.
Hey, big guy. Look at that.
During his career, Kavanaugh has discovered 73 new species of beetles. His most intriguing discovery happened in 1980 in Northern California's Trinity Alps.
In the 1980s, while I was a scoutmaster with my boys, 3 of my sons were in the troop, we went hiking in the Trinity Alps, and we went out and found a new species. I named Nebria duodecima, which means Troop 12, in honor of the Boy Scout troop.
The new beetle hinted at a web of evolutionary relationships that would take Kavanaugh 3 decades to piece together. First, Kavanaugh found that his beetle was related to a species of beetle in Oregon and Washington's Cascade Mountain Range. This northern beetle had been discovered on Washington's Mount Rainier in a place called Paradise Valley and had been named Nebria paradisei. Kavanaugh noticed a curious thing about Nebria paradisei. It always traveled with another beetle called Nebria van Dyckei.
What I really found out was that they really live together. Found them under the same rocks during the daytime. They're out together on the snowfield foraging at night and actually finding mates. And they are very closely tied to one another. And that's what gave me the idea that I probably should look in the Trinities for the companion of Nebria duodecima.
If the beetle on Mount Rainier was related to the Boy Scout troop beetle in California's Trinity Alps, and it had a constant companion, Kavanaugh reasoned that the traveling buddy also should have a relative in the Trinity Alps. Finding that relative would mean discovering an entirely new species and reaffirming a central foundation of Darwin's work.
What's really exciting about this is there haven't been too many examples of situations in which taxonomists like myself or biologists have been able to predict things. Perhaps the most exciting examples involves Darwin, who, on finding an orchid with a nectary that was about 10 inches long, predicted that there must be some pollinator that's attracted by that orchid and feeds on that long nectary. And it was decades later that actually the moth, a sphinx moth or a hawk moth, was found with a tongue that long. It's fun to feel like you're in the company of someone like Darwin who makes a prediction based on the certainty that this long nectary meant something. It wasn't just a chance occurrence in nature, and that it was related to something else that was co-evolving with that flower, probably its pollinator, and he was right.
Like evolutionary biologists everywhere, Kavanaugh's work is framed by Charles Darwin's discovery of evolution. 150 years ago, the English naturalist published his findings in a landmark book called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. It was the culmination of an unlikely journey.
He was a wealthy young man whose father was a physician, and he went to medical school in Edinburgh, and he decided that he did not wish to become a physician, but he was interested in natural science.
So Darwin took up studies to become a clergyman, which would give him plenty of free time to pursue his passion for nature. But at 22, he once again abandoned his studies, this time to accept an invitation to travel around the world as a naturalist. During the 5-year voyage on board the HMS Beagle, he collected specimens and data in Oceania, Africa, and South America. Other naturalists of his day, and even Darwin's grandfather before them, had proposed that living organisms changed over generations, but the idea was taboo.
During Darwin's time, the general idea is that species were unchangeable. They talked about immutable species. And this comes from the idea of special creation, that God had created the kinds of organisms pretty much as we see them today.
During his voyage on board the Beagle, Darwin made observations that flew in the face of this belief.
The fossils that Darwin found in South America were very similar to the animals that were living there when he visited at the present time. And he eventually came to the idea that there could be an ancestral relationship between those earlier forms and the present forms.
The first edition of On the Origin of Species sold out and caused a stir. It wasn't only because the book intimated that humans descended from other animals. It was because change in the natural world didn't seem to be brought about by divine intervention.
There was no planning, no foresight, no design. Things simply grew and developed by what seemed to be a chance, blind mechanism.
This one was referred to as the archaic humans, something around 200 to 400,000 years.
The controversy remains. Though evolution by natural selection is today the framework of the biological sciences, its teaching has been contested, largely unsuccessfully, in public school districts around the United States. Polls show that 40% of Americans don't accept that humans descend from earlier species of animals.
God did not take millions and billions of years to produce his complete creation, including man. The Bible teaches that God finished his creation in 6 literal days. In other words,
but some scientists feel it is possible to bridge the divide between science and religion.
There really isn't an essential conflict if you assume that evolution was the mechanism by which God created, if you will, the diversity of life on Earth. It all had to start somehow.
In their quest to understand evolution's mechanisms, scientists are using ever more sophisticated tools. While biologists during Darwin's time relied exclusively on their keen observation of specimens, today's scientists can also glean information by looking at their genetic makeup. Kavanaugh teamed up with University of California, Berkeley student Sean Scoville to do DNA sequencing of his alpine beetles in the Trinity Alps.
I met Dave Kavanaugh about 5 years ago when I was starting my PhD because I'd found some interesting beetles in the mountains of California, and I didn't know what they were. And Dave was an expert on this group of beetles.
In the summer of 2008, Scoville planned to climb the Trinity Alps Thompson Peak to collect beetles for Kavanaugh's DNA studies. Kavanaugh seized the opportunity to complete his 28-year-old evolutionary puzzle. As Darwin had predicted his moth from the orchid, Kavanaugh predicted that Scoville would find a new species of beetle traveling with the beetle he'd found with his Boy Scouts in 1980.
I told him, while you're there, be on the lookout for a much bigger black beetle that will be living right with that one, if it's there. It's totally unknown, but I'm telling you, you're going to find him. I'm a little less mobile than I used to be, and he's a young, strong guy like I used to be, and he volunteered to go get them for me.
The hike was about a 6-hour hike, and a very beautiful hike along a narrow canyon with a series of waterfalls. It's very, very lovely. And I passed the last waterfall and got up to Grizzly Lake. There's a series of streams that come into the lake, and I searched along those streams for beetles. I wasn't having much luck until I got very close to the glacier, and the habitat just changed dramatically. The trees disappeared. It was mostly barren rock, and I flipped over the first rock.
And bingo, he found it. He recognized it because I'd told him exactly how big it would be and what it would look like.
2 months after the discovery, Kavanaugh has started the process of figuring out if the beetle Scoville retrieved is indeed a new species.
One of the easiest and most frequently useful ways of telling different species of insects apart is to examine very closely their genitalia, the male and female genitalia. The male structure is called the adyagus, and that's the tool to transfer sperm to the female. On the female side, she has what we call a bursa copulatrix, the sac in which copulation occurs. And so today I'm going to be dissecting both males and females to look at the details of the morphology of their respective reproductive structures and see if I see differences in those compared with the populations for the Cascade species. That's a close relative. And I'm expecting to find some. I hope so. Because if I do, then that's a strong indication that these things are independently evolving and probably represent distinct species.
So these have to cook for a little while. This is what clears away all the muscle and lets me visualize the very soft membranous parts of the reproductive system.
It might be surprising to realize that species living hundreds of miles apart, maybe 300 or 400 miles at the closest, are in fact very closely related species.
In order for new species to develop, members of the common ancestor species need to become separated from each other. This is why islands often provide researchers with an ideal laboratory to study evolution. In 1835, 4 years into his voyage on the Beagle, Darwin landed on the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador. He found evidence that 13 species of finches, each with a distinctive beak shape, had developed from a common ancestor most likely arrived from the South American mainland. So if the California beetle turns out to be a new species related to the beetle found on Mount Rainier, did their common ancestor also get stranded on an island? The answer could lie in big changes that happened on their respective mountain ranges.
Certainly these areas would have been united by a common habitat. During the ice ages, these might have been continuous habitat for these species, with snowfields and glaciers on smaller mountains. So what would be created here by the warming of the lowlands and the retreat of cold habitats higher and higher in the mountains is islands, habitat islands that are becoming more and more isolated.
So where would Kavanaugh search for evidence of a common ancestor that would help him confirm that the two beetle species are relatives? Since mountains are continuously eroding, beetle fossils are near impossible to come by, so Kavanaugh will rely on DNA. Scoville will compare a DNA sequence from both beetles.
You can reconstruct the relationships of a group of individuals or a group of species based on that DNA sequence. And those relationships are determined based on how similar the sequences are.
The beetles' gene sequences, just like ours, are made up of combinations of 4 nucleotide molecules, represented by the letters A, T, C, and G. The places where the nucleotides are different is where a genetic mutation has taken place.
Genetic mutations are events that happen by chance. They're typically errors in how DNA is replicated during the division of cells. Sometimes they end up being bad, creating proteins or products that are bad for the organism, and that organism will die.
But beneficial mutations give organisms an edge over others in their species, like a better beak, for example. As Darwin found, many more individuals are born than can survive, so those with an additional advantage will have a better chance of reproducing and thus be naturally selected. To introduce his findings on natural selection, Darwin cleverly started his book on the origin of species with a scenario that would be familiar to his readers. He talked about the breeding of domesticated animals, particularly pigeons.
I have a common pigeon. This is the rock dove, so to speak. This particular kind of bird is ancestral to all of the other domestic varieties, whether they're eating pigeons, racing pigeons, show pigeons. You notice it's a fairly small bird, and it's adapted to flying around fairly short distances. Whereas the birds that I've been breeding and other pigeon fanciers for quite a while are developed with much bigger bird. It can do up to 600, 700 miles in a day. So they're really flying athletes. I've had these since I was about 7, same family of pigeons. I've tried to hold on to some traits and get rid of others, especially the ones that didn't seem to be advantageous to long-distance flying. The ones that don't perform as well, I give to my competition.
Darwin used the analogy of human beings selecting certain pigeons for their ability to fly very far, selecting other pigeons for the ornamentation of their feathers, for example. He wanted to use that as an analogy for nature in the wild, being able to select for certain characteristics of an organism to make it survive better and live longer and reproduce better in the environment that it had.
Darwin really understood natural selection quite well. What he didn't understand is how advantages individuals possessed were actually passed on over generations. As it turns out, we have genes and a genome within our bodies, and that's how our information about who we are, what we are, is passed on through generations. And Darwin didn't know this. He didn't know that DNA exists.
Back at the lab, Scoville examines the results of his gene sequencing, comparing the beetle from the Trinity Alps with the one from the Cascades.
And what you can see is that most of the nucleotides match. They all have the same nucleotides at these positions. But then we get into areas where there are differences. You can see here there's a group that has T's and a group that has C's. And then further along there's a group that has G's and a group that has A's. And these differences are mutations that have happened over time, since they had a common ancestor.
Kavanaugh and Scoville are meeting to share their findings. Kavanaugh has found a number of physical differences between the Mount Rainier beetle, called Nebria van Dyki, and the unnamed Trinity Alps beetle.
This is the female Bursa copulatrix from Van Dyki. And it's really symmetrical. See, it's got a nice rounded, what I call dorsal lobe. Whereas in the new one, this is very asymmetrical. Mm-hmm. Then if we look at the males, and at least Van Dyki seems to be much thicker across here. Mm-hmm. A much thicker shaft. But they're not as different as I expected.
Using their DNA sequences, Scoville has prepared a tree for Kavanaugh that shows how the two beetles are related.
So this is the point in time where the common ancestor occurred, and it gave rise to these two separate lineages. One lineage became our new species in the Trinity Mountains, and the other lineage became the species that's found in Mount Rainier. They're not only different, but they've been separate for a long time and have had a chance to accumulate genetic differences over that period of time. What I found is quite a distinctive difference with the grouping of the new species. There's about 20 mutations that separate them, which
Wow.
could be a significant amount of time, perhaps 500,000 years or more. So that's good news.
I'm pretty confident that on all those grounds we've got something new, and it's pretty exciting. But I'm really happy to have the genetic backup to go along with the morphology.
You know, we'll leave a legacy behind with the name of the new species, and that's just a great honor and real excitement for me, yeah.
I'm thinking of calling it Nebria predicta, because in a sense I predicted it. It could also be expectata, I expected it. Maybe that's less pompous, but we'll see. Most of my colleagues think I should go with predicta.
Once it has been named, the new beetle will take its place in the hierarchy of living beings, a tree that has been evolving in complexity since Darwin's days. So far, 1 million species of insects have been described and named. It seems like a lot, but scientists estimate that at least 1 million more remain to be discovered in places like China.
Now tonight what we're going to do a one-night trap for ground beetles, and we're just going to put deer in there.
Darwin said that evolution happens at different speeds. Today, scientists warn that in the face of habitat destruction and global warming, the rate of extinction is accelerating.
This past summer, I found that pretty much throughout Western North America, but I think most dramatically in California, I actually had to go higher to find the same things that I was finding at particular elevations in the 70s and early 80s. And to find their optimum temperature, the beetles are having to move up the mountains. Paul Ehrlich had this great analogy of Earth as an airplane flying through the air, and we're, through extinction, are losing rivets indiscriminately, and we don't necessarily know which of those rivets is going to be vital to the safety and functioning of that airplane, and so we worry about every rivet that's lost.
Oh my gosh, we got Aristocroa. Oh baby, that's a new species. So that is worth all the effort right there.